Hey everyone, it's DrRic. I wanted to just go through a couple of applications from my last video. DrRic tutorial exercise Jack Lalane style. Check it out. It's for the beginner exerciser on a budget. And as I always tell my patients, exercise, if you want to include it as far as some form of activity, and everybody has to have an activity of some sort. Even if you're a construction worker, you do 10,000 steps a day. At work, I always say you have to show me what you're doing outside of work. So something as easy as 30 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week of something like this would be doable. Now, if you're stuck in a chair and or a wheelchair, and or finally if you have really bad knees and you can't be walking up and down or getting up and down off of a gym bench, you can do this at home. So I'll use my usual props. These props are 1 gallon containers, empty now, but depending on if you fill up a 1 gallon container with water, it can get to about 8.5 pounds, or here I just leveled it out at 5 pounds each. There's a little bit of movement, and they are sealed. I can't imagine doing a bench press and then having anything pour on you, so watch yourself. So the objective is, if you're going to start an exercise routine and you haven't been in any sports organized before, or you don't have any idea about what you're doing, never been to a physical therapist, number one, talk to your doctor, talk to me. If there is an ailment or a region of the body and your deductible is low, I can send you to a physical therapist. At least they can start you on worrying about your problematic areas, and then you can take off from there. You always want to take care of weak spots first, but if you're relatively healthy, you haven't started, this is the way I would do it. I would always start from head to toe. It's easy to remember. And always keep accountability with a calendar of some sort. My suggestion that I mentioned in the past is 3 to 5 days a week of something where you're doing moderate intensity exercise. That means you're somewhat out of breath. The perceived exertion is a little bit fast with your heart. You don't have to be totally drenched, but a little sweaty too. So if you can get to that eventually, that's cool. What you want to do is start out. Again, I would do really easy resistance exercises. Aside from the push-ups and the sit-ups and a couple of the other things I showed you on the last video, this is how I would start. So we'll go by body part. And the first body part would be the trapezius. That's the highest muscle. And with the trapezius muscle, you want to essentially rotate up and then drop. Rotate up and then drop. You should keep your head in a central position, because if you're tilted over like this, you might be balancing the wrong way or building up in an asymmetric fashion. So that's essentially all it is. And it doesn't seem like much, and 5 gallons is not going to really get us anywhere. We can do a lot of these, but that's just the thing. If you're using something of a light weight, then you'll have to go to exhaustion. And we could actually be here forever, but this is just the beginner course, right? So you just have to remember when you start these things out how many repetitions it takes of this movement to get you to, oh, this is pretty tight, my shoulders and my trapezius muscles are really full now. So somehow you're going to have to remember. You can fill these up more, or you can get heavier weights. But that's the first one, is trap exercises. And if you check out my video, DrRic tutorial shoulder rolls, I actually incorporate breath with that. So these are your traps. Sometimes the bodybuilders will use things called deadlift movements to also build these guys up. That's the first. Second would be deltoid. Deltoid is 3, delta. 3 heads of the deltoid or shoulder muscle is anterior, medial, and posterior head. I like doing these, I think these are really empowering for me, but I like to build up the heads individually. So you take your canisters and you just lift up to the front. You have to make sure your shoulders are retracted so you're not slouching like this, and your posture is good. Anytime you do any kind of exercises, your posture has to be straight up and down. Just like in yoga, we use proper posture to allow energy to flow. We don't have to talk about energy here, we just talk about movement. So this is a repetition. Sometimes you can go a little higher than 90 degrees. Totally up to you. Once you hit 90, maybe a couple degrees past, that is hitting the anterior deltoid. Big calf muscles, sometimes hard to get big, but if you keep on working on these, anterior delts will fatigue much faster than trapezius muscles, so you might have to empty some of this out. Again, remember how many you get to fatigue. Then I usually go with something called a giant set, meaning no break, go straight into number 2. Number 2 is lateral raises. Have to move forward. Lateral raises would be exactly what they sound like, lateral. So you have to make sure you get into the proper position with your back and spine, and your shoulders have to be somewhat flat. Shoulder blades have to be flat on your back. There are some people who get really low and build up like this, but we're going to be doing rear head or posterior head deltoids anyway. So this is for the medial head. Notice how I'm holding this bucket or this bottle. I guess depending on the bottle you get will be what kind of grip you can hold. Or you can go to Goodwill and see if anybody gave away their 2 or 5 pound weights. So you do enough of these, but you remember and write down on your pad how many it took to get to failure with the desired weight that you're using. Now we go for the last head, the posterior head. You usually have to get into kind of a bent over position and then lift straight back. This is tough to go so flat, especially while I'm filming, but I'll go as flat as I can and try to isolate the movement. So this way, you're working the rear head of the deltoid. You're trying to isolate it. So inevitably, when you do a movement, whether it's anterior, lateral, or rear, you're going to call in other muscles to also help. Without a machine, it's almost impossible to do strict isolation, but these are pretty good. So remember, jot down what it took to get you to failure, where you can hardly get to the last repetition and then you are tired. So write that down. And then I would go towards pectoralis muscles, or pecs. These are easy. Usually you have to get, again, assuming you're in a wheelchair, get forward a little bit. And essentially 2 movements. You can go flat, but it has to be flat on a bench. If you don't want to go flat, you can go incline. So the pectoralis is 2. There's the major and the minor pectoralis. And you'll hit both of them even if you do an incline bench. So the bench press, I'll hold it like this. Bench press is straight up. And the pectoralis muscle is pretty strong. So this will probably, again, like the trapezius muscle, I'm going to be here forever. So you can maybe marry this or combine this with a set of push-ups to fatigue the muscle before you get to the weights. That's 1. Remember, write down how many it took to get the bench press. Straight, up, and down. Up and down. Usually, if you have armrests, they'll get in the way. But it should be at least, if you imagine a broomstick, you can get it to right where it's touching the chest and straight up. If you're lying flat, again, same thing. Get it down to where the imaginary broomstick is right about above your chest, above the nipple line, straight up. Next would be flies, or pectoralis flies. This used to be my favorite when I was bodybuilding, but might have to be a different hold. You're hugging a tree. This is the one where I'm afraid the water's going to pour on me. Hugging a tree, and it has to be somewhat perpendicular to the ground. So again, you record how long it takes to get to failure and move on. Next would be latissimus dorsi. Pull-ups will be the best thing, and I think I just did a video for pull-ups. But if you can't get off a chair, sometimes you can either do one-armed. If you do, my lats are pretty decent, so you can either go down if you can, and lift up. Now the objective is you have to be somewhat flat. I'll face the camera. Your back has to be flat, and your shoulders should come back. If you're kind of keeping your shoulders parallel to the ground, then you try to isolate this movement to only feel contraction right here. This is the latissimus dorsi. It goes from the sides along the border of the scapula or shoulder blade right to the middle of the back. So you gotta keep it straight. You gotta try to get full contraction at the highest part of your movement, which is right here. And you try to contract and feel the crunch right here. So that is kind of the equivalent of a long pulley row. And you always have to do both sides. Here I'll just do it where I'm leaning forward. Isolate, try to keep the shoulders parallel to the floor, and as best as you can, squeeze that latissimus dorsi right at the end. And you can do this with TheraBands as well, jotting down how many repetitions it took for you to feel kind of full and fatigued. And it could be also, when you do these big movements, that the smaller muscles will fatigue faster. That's okay. You might have to either concoct something where you're using less weights, or just work on this. If it's fatiguing faster and it's a limiting factor with your movement, then that means you have to work on your forearms. So don't get too discouraged if all you feel is a forearm burn or a bicep, tricep burn, and you get nothing here. Eventually you will. Sometimes going to a club and doing isolated machine work will specifically target the individual muscle groups pretty well, but we're just beginning here. So we talked about trapezius, deltoid, 3 heads, pectoralis, 2 heads, latissimus dorsi, and then the rhomboids in the back. Lats and rhomboids kind of go together. I think the only way to really make the lats go wide is to do pull-ups. And you can actually rig in the door jamb a pull-up bar and just use that to pull you off of the chair or the wheelchair. But you'll have to buy that. There are rigs where you can screw in the hold on the side and you get a closet pole. Or, matter of fact, you can actually get the pieces for a closet pole with a U-shaped bracket on the side, screw that into the door, and then put the closet pole just the perfect size into the door, and it should support you, but you'll need long screws to support you. So finally we have the arms. Arm work, these guys will probably, as I mentioned, fatigue faster. There's essentially 2. Bicep, which is 2 heads of this guy here, is essentially a curl. So whether you do a curl with your thumbs pointing up, or a curl with your palms down, this develops more dorsal forearm, or a curl with your palms up, this develops more volar forearm, but you're really stressing out the bicep mostly. So just remember, you might fatigue these guys out faster. Everything is in proportion. So I have some guys I see at the gym that are huge arms because they can wear sleeveless shirts, but their pecs and their shoulders, and you don't win contests with that. Not that we're all in a contest, but you want symmetry. Symmetry always got me to, symmetry got me to win 2 contests in bodybuilding back in 1982. I think there were massive guys I was competing against, but I had pretty decent symmetry. I was well cut, and I had muscle mass back then. And it seems to go when you turn 55. So that's bicep. Write down what it takes to fatigue. Now we do tricep. These are called tricep kickbacks. Kind of like you're doing the lats again, but arm has to be almost parallel to the ground, at least the back of the tricep, and you just kick back. So it's extended. This, I'm pretty close to isolating the movement for the tricep. So the smaller you get, the smaller muscles that you work with, the easier it is to isolate movement and direct force to the muscle. All you're doing with the muscle is you're working to overload it. If you can overload a muscle, then hopefully you get good rest, you eat properly, good protein right after your exercise, rebuild and get stronger, and that theoretically increases the myofibrils of the muscle, makes it fatter. Also at the same time, all those myofibrils, or fibers in the muscle, they grow mitochondria, these little energy factories, and those little guys, those are the things that burn up your fat tissue. So as you first start exercising, you might not notice a change in the scale, but you just might notice a change in your waist size, because the more muscle you get, you actually get heavier. The more fat you lose, it'll balance itself out, and then you'll accelerate your weight loss. But don't be discouraged if you just stay the same with regards to your weight as you make this lifestyle change, but you notice your waistline and maybe your chest and your muscle mass is defining better. So now those are the two as far as arm work. Last, always have to include core. So, and that fallacy of doing core work to lose weight in your core doesn't work. Usually the last place that your body will take fat away from that energy battery, which is all it is, if you're constantly in stress and you're constantly eating nasty food, the body's going to put all the extra energy and tuck it away into the battery for later use. This is the last part of the battery to go. You've probably seen this in boxing movies where one guy passes a medicine ball, people are back to back, and they just keep on going until somebody fatigues out. So this is pretty safe. And because of the momentum I'm generating, it's asking me to not only move, but stop, move, stop. So that's the plyometric portion of exercise. I don't really like that for beginners. I have a lot of guys that do CrossFit and they bounce everywhere. I think plyometrics does develop strength, but it also sets you up, if you're not trained well, for injury. So just work with strict form first. Know your repetitions. Know your repetitions for failure. Know your weight that you're working with and how many sets is good for you. Usually it's 3 sets. And then you can go on to the fancy stuff. So that's pretty much it. All those little tiny exercises I did gave me a pretty decent pump. So now, and that's the other thing is sometimes what I'll do is I'll try to get patients if they have a hunting reflex or craving at about 2 o'clock or they get tired at 2 o'clock. My suggestion is, number one, you eat more of a high protein meal at 1:30, 1 o'clock to prepare for when you're going to be tired. And maybe you get a 5 to 10 minute little thing like this going so that your body just experienced exercise. So instead of the hormone making you sleepy at 2 o'clock or whenever your time is you crash, you just injected yourself with a little bit of exercise hormone. Adrenaline, norepinephrine, endorphin, that's all flowing in me right now, even though I just did whatever time it is now, probably 10 minutes. I just did that, but I've got a little bit floating around with me, and now I should be feeling pretty decent for the next couple of hours. Now, if I was to really work out, I'll feel decent for about 12 hours because I feel so good from my workout, but that's the benefit of this inner pharmacy. The way to unlock and turn on the inner pharmacy is usually with stuff like this, eating the right foods, getting the right sleep, trying to control anger or stress response. All that stuff works, so it makes us miracles or bulletproof. And the opposite is true too. No exercise, bad food, smoking, alcohol, stress all the time and anger, will set you up for the biggest diseases in your generation or your genetics to be expressed. So it's your choice, but the direction you can try to find and just keep on chipping away. Hopefully this helps. Don't forget to subscribe to me for other weekly words of wisdom.